So I've been focusing a bit on arm studies recently and trying to improve how I draw the arm and get the forms correctly. And so the way I study usually, or the way I approach studying any anatomy or human anatomy, is that I would get like resources such as books, and I'll go on Pinterest, and then I'll go on YouTube to actually see what other artists do or how they see drawing that particular part of the human body, and how their approach is to drawing that part of the human body. And then I would have different ways at which I could learn. So if I in case I get bored with looking at the books, and I wouldn't get bored looking at Pinterest. If I get bored looking at Pinterest references, I wouldn't get bored watching YouTube tutorials on how other artists approach drawing whatever it is that I'm studying at the moment. And so that's what I did for the arm. I've been looking at anatomy for sculptors quite recently, and I've been doing a lot of the drawings from that book, which has been very helpful to my understanding of the drawing of the arm and the shoulder in particular. So, and then what I decided to do was that I decided to go and check out David Finch in his video where he talked about constructive arm drawing. And then in that video, he broke things down into basic blocking, into the forearm rotation, anatomy roughing, practical construction, and drawing studies from reference. Those are like the major topics in which he talked about. And so what I'm just going to do in this video is that I'm going to show you my own notes that I took, because what I do with these videos is that I watch what they are doing and then I follow along with what they are doing, and I'm going to explain kind of my understanding of what he talked about in the video. So we're going to start quickly with the basic blocking. So the basic blocking is basically what he what he was talking about there is that a simple way on how to draw the arm or how to break down the arm so that it's going to be easily digestible, and then you could just use your intuition and then add the details and stuff to make it easier for you. And for me, the way I always approached it, because when I watched a decent amount of Mark Brunett's videos where he talks a lot about construction, he talks a lot about the art fundamentals, and one thing I learned or I picked up was the way he drew the arms, or he drew the limbs in general, and which is in the sense that he breaks them down into tubes. He uses tube shape to actually break down the arms, and he uses simple shapes like boxes and cylinders to actually break down parts of the human body in general, not just the arm. And the way I've always looked at drawing the arm was that I've always viewed it as like a long cylinder, both the upper and then the lower arm. Same also for the legs, right? And the way David Finch talked about the basic blocking here is that he divided it into a tube for the upper and a tube for the lower arm. So for this side and then this side, he broke it down. And then apart from that, what he did was that he then divided each tube into two. So we'd have 4 tubes in total, right? So the first part, the first tube or the first blocking for the arm will be for the shoulder or the deltoid. Then the second part would be for the biceps and the triceps area, and then the third part would be for the upper, like forearm, where we have the brachioradialis muscle and other muscles that originate from that area. And then lastly, we have a tube for the lower arm, which would end at our wrist. So when you break it down into this, you make it as simplified as this, it becomes a bit more easier for you to draw. And then he then broke them down into the front, side, and back view. Whenever I was doing this study, I definitely used reference, because when I study, I don't just study in isolation. I could be listening to what he's saying in the video, or what an artist is saying in the video, or how he's breaking things down. But I may not pick it up immediately, because what I could do is that I may miss something that he's explaining, or I may not fully grasp what he's saying, and then I will just do a quick internet search and just try to figure out what they are talking about, or I could check it in a book. Maybe I saw something like that relating to it, and then the two information would then fuse together to make sense in my brain. That's what I'm trying to say. And whenever I'm doing this study, I'm not coming like on a high horse. I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to learn. So if I don't understand something, or I'm not getting the view of something correctly, or I'm not sure about it, I go and look for other references, and I don't just depend on that work. And it's something I would suggest. So we got the front side and then the back view, and then we also got them broken down as a simple, like, constructed brick shape. Like if you use wood, if you're doing like a wood construction and you use it, you do like sort of like a sculpture of the arm in a wood shape, to kind of simplify it for our brains, especially if you're starting out. And the goal of this process is majorly to focus on the major shapes that make up the arm, and then reduce those shapes to simple forms, so that it can simplify the process of actually drawing the arm. So and that is how I would suggest that you approach every single drawing, right? It makes things a lot more easier and a lot more fun, and you don't always have headache with drawing. And then if there are other things you need to adjust, you then adjust them, and then you add your final details, and which is the fun part. So the next thing we are going to look at is the forearm rotation. So this part had me a bit confused, because if you look at the arm in different angles, they can be quite confusing, and to adjust the muscles or the parts of the arm so that they will actually look convincingly accurate during this rotation, it does leave me a bit confused at times. But what I understood from looking at Anatomy for Artists, the book, is that there are basically two forms of rotation, right, that the arm does. Like, the arm doesn't do any other form of rotation apart from these two rotation right here, right? So that is the supination and then the pronation, right? The supination, where the palm is facing up, rather, right? And then the pronation, where the palm is facing down or facing away from the face. So these are the two major forms of rotation, and of course we have the in between, where we have the first pronation, the first supination, we have the demi pronation and demi supination, and all these positions or rotational positions in between. So when you are considering the forearm rotation, right, if you are drawing, the bones of the arm are kind of like the most important thing to take note of, right? The muscles are important, but you kind of have to have the bones of the arm like at the back of your head, so that it will be easy to understand. Because we have our humerus bone, we have our ulna, and then we have our radius, right? And during a supinated position like this, the arm, the radius, and the ulnar bones are actually, they just look normal, right? They look normal. But when you actually twist them or change your arm to a pronated position, the bones actually intersect each other, they cross over each other, and this position that's the pronated position. So you kind of have to have that at the back of your head, and that is why the muscles look a little bit weird, because they are not totally twisting, because some parts they are twisting, but they are not totally twisting, because some parts just look a little bit weird. That can be fun to draw. So and one thing to note during this position is that the wrist, right, of our arm in the pronated position and the supinated position are different, right? So when you actually put the arm in I'll call this a semi-pronated position or supinated position. I'll call it semi-pronated position. You can see that the arm is a little bit slimmer than when your arm is in a supinated position. I know that can be a bit confusing, but like I said, whenever you're studying or you're looking at these things, don't just rely on one material. That one material could only get you so far, right? It may have all the things you need, but the way your brain might work is that you might not just necessarily get everything that book is saying until you then look at another material. Then what that previous material was talking about, you could then catch up and actually understand. And when you go back to that material to look at it, everything just becomes easier, and the whole learning process is just smoother. So yeah, that's just it about the forearm rotation. I would suggest that if you are doing the arm study like this, like me, you actually practice it over and over again, because the uh, anatomy for sculptors book, it does have a lot of really good references that you can look at for you to sort of improve your drawing of the forearm rotation. The next thing we are looking at is anatomy roughing, or we'll just talk a little bit of anatomy, right? In as much as we talked about the rotation, or we talked about how the bones are important, it is also important to note some of the major muscles or the major forms that actually make up the arm, right? So, um, anatomy is useful for understanding that, like the underlying structure and the forms, right, of the whatever it is that you're looking to draw, whether it's your back, whether it's the neck, whether it's the head or the torso, right? It's important to note anatomy, but like noting the names of the anatomy is not necessarily what's going to help you draw, right? It will help you, but it's not what it will help you with spotting it so that you can position it better. But it's not what's going to help you with actually drawing it. Understanding the structure, like is like things like the blocking that we talked about, is what's actually going to help you. And understanding how, like practicing how to draw it in rotational position, is what's going to help you. But the anatomy is also very important. And the anatomy, when you're studying anatomy, to simplify things, it's good to just look at the anatomy in the front, side and back view in either a pronated or a supinated position, because when you look at the arm in a pronated position, the front and then the side and then the back view is different from when you look at the arm in a pronated position in a front, side and then a back view. And it's just something that you kind of have to note, right? They are all front, side and back view, but they are different and they look different. So and that's what I did here. So I picked a position and I stuck with it. So that's what I did here. So the major muscles to note are the deltoid, the biceps, the triceps, the brachialis, the extensor muscles, the flexor muscles, and then the ridge muscles, right? You have to take note of this, and I did highlight them with color so that it will be. Oh, I like highlighting these muscles with color when I work, because it's quite fun and it just makes it easier to spot, and I can always go back to it and look at it and learn and revisit and refresh my memory when I'm doing the studies. So those are the major muscles, and the reason why I actually saw this, the extensor muscles and then the flexor muscles and then the ridge muscles. These are just like a group name for the muscles that actually perform the extensor functions and the flexor functions and then the ridge muscles. So that you don't necessarily need to remember all the, because the flexor muscles are a decent amount, say about 5 or 6, I think, and then the extensor muscles same. So it just makes things a lot more easier, because we're not training to be general surgeons here. We're just trying to, improve our anatomy. And of course, most cases we'll remember all the muscles, but these basics that I've just listed out here are actually the most important things to remember when you're, remembering or like taking note of the anatomy when you're drawing, right? And also the bones too are also important to note, like the radius ulnar and then the humerus bones, and also our elbows and then our wrist. And then the next thing we'll talk about is practical arm construction, right? Where he talked about Bridgman method. And to be honest, I don't know a lot about Bridgman method, so I can't guide you there, because I haven't looked at the book. I've heard the name multiple times, but I haven't looked at the book. But what he said essentially is that he talked about the way he approached drawing figures was by using interconnecting blocks, right? And to be honest, that is how the muscle look. If you look at a detailed anatomy breakdown, or if you look at the muscular system of the human body, they're going to see how all these muscles interconnect with each other. That's why for me, whenever I try to study the muscle or the anatomy, I try to look at a single muscle in isolation and see how it looks. Look at the origin point of the muscle and look at where it's connected to the muscle, so that when I look at the full muscular system of that particular muscle, I'm going to see the other muscles that overlap that muscle and the muscle that they intersect with, so that it's a bit more easier. So if you look at the if you look at the arm itself, you can see that the deltoid is sort of sitting in between the brachialis and the triceps, and the triceps is, is on top of different muscle, and then the ridge muscle is connected with the flexor muscles, and then the extensor muscles, and vice versa. There's just some sort of interconnectedness with the muscle, but it's, you don't just approach that individually. You start with the basic construction of the arm, and then you then break things down, and it becomes easier. And you don't just start this one day. You have to do it over and over again. You don't just get good at it one day. You have to try it over and over and over again to get good at it and then improve. Because if you actually look at my own drawings, you see that sometimes I do struggle and I do make a bit of mistake here and there. He then talked about an important concept for making your arm drawings believable in space, and that concept he was talking about is simply the deformation that comes from clenching and unclenching muscle. And the way I interpreted that was simply the flexing and contraction of muscles, majorly the bicep and tricep muscle. Because if you look at your muscles and you then try to make a fist and then flex, you actually see that once you bring your arm up, you see that your bicep flexes, right, while your tricep stretches. And then once you put your arm straight, you see that your tricep, it's flexed a bit while your bicep is stretched. You see that your tricep sort of goes up and tightens while your bicep just stretches. And practicing this stuff is going to, or rather keeping it in mind, is going to help improve your drawing. All these basic movements are always going to make your drawing look a bit more believable whenever you draw it. And you don't just look at it in theoretically and just nod your head in agreement that it makes sense. You have to actually practice it and draw the arm in these positions so that it will register properly in your brain. And of course, you could forget it once in a while and stuff like that, but that's just life, and you just have to go back whenever you're feeling a bit insecure about your knowledge. That's why even the great artists, they still do studies till this day, life studies and otherwise, right? So, and then the last thing he then talked about, which I practiced, was drawing from references, right? So once you've gotten all these basics in your head, you've gotten all this information in your head, you've understood the forms, you've understood the construction of an arm, you've seen how it works. You might actually like the way certain artists draw, right? And then there's nothing wrong once you've understood these basics with then looking at those artists' work and then picking it up and noting one or two things that I actually like from the work. Maybe the way they apply their shadows, the way they do their lighting, the way how hard-edged their work is, how cartoonish their work is. There's nothing wrong with picking their work and actually practicing from it, because you're going to learn a lot from it, whether it's semi-realistic, realistic, or just completely stylized, right? So just pick the artist you like, or the various artists that you like, or this is something you fancy in their work. Just pick it and then study. And that's what I did here. I pretty much enjoy the way David Finch draws his work, how detailed it is. Guys like Jason Farbach and Takehiko Inoue, I like the way they draw their work. It's quite realistic. Even Jim Lee as well, it's quite realistic, but you can just tell that this is a comic book style, right? So the way I study is that I could pick, I don't do this often, right? But when I can, you could just pick their works, either from their comic book, you flip a comic book page or a cover art that they've done, pick their work that they've done and just try to copy it to sort of see how you could replicate it. Not necessarily replicate it exactly, but you just replicate what you're feeling like you just allow yourself to express yourself, rather, for lack of a better word, right? So you may not necessarily like how they shadow, but you like how they draw anatomy, right? You may not like how they draw anatomy, but you like their lighting, right? So you could fuse the artist that you like his anatomy and then the artist that you like his inking or shadowing. You could fuse that together and then you could actually draw from reference. But me, I just like the shadow, the way he hatches and the shadow and all that, and then I just drew it. So in conclusion, just don't hold yourself back from using other artists' work as reference. And guys, that's it for today, and that's what this video is about. Hopefully you learned something or two. Just keep drawing, keep like expressing yourself through art, and don't stop. Like, always aim for progress, not perfection. At least that's what I try to do every day. If you like this video, please give it a like, a thumbs up, because we are trying to get to 2K subscribers like this year. Please help us out, help me out rather. I'm the only one doing it. Help me out. And if you have any comments, leave them in the comment section. If you have any suggestions for new videos, leave them in the comment section. And I'll see you in the next video, and peace out.